Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to our Rent Responsibly segment at our Astrho Live Partner Showcase. I'm here with Larry from our Astrho team, as well as Dana Luther from Rent Responsibly. And we're excited to hear everything she has to share today about Rent Responsibly and how they're helping with advocacy efforts. So Dana, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. So glad to be here. So excited to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So I'm just going to jump right in, knowing that we've got a short session here. So what I wanted to do just to kick things off is give you a little background on how I got here. I did not go to school for advocacy or public relations policy or government affairs. But throughout my journey into short-term rentals, I found myself in a position where I did not have a choice but to get involved. And so I'm just going to take you on a little roadmap journey here on how I arrived to speak to you today about something called advocacy. So on the left side, you'll see a picture of my brother and I. About 4 years ago, I joined him in his property management business called Effortless Rental Group. Our biggest footprint of properties was in Denver, Colorado, but we had properties all over the country. Back in 2019, in the spring, we started to see that hosts were getting arrested. And we found out that because of some regulations that were passed a couple years prior, the primary residence requirement made a very narrow scope in which hosts were able to short-term rent their properties in Denver. At that point, it was quite terrifying to think, wow, people are ending up with mugshots on the front page of the newspaper. Where could this land us next? And so what we ended up doing was starting our own short-term rental alliance called the Mile High Hosts. From there, the group of us got together and we realized the first thing we needed to make as a mission critical mission was to correct a really bad narrative of what it meant to be a short-term rental operator within our community. And so we hosted the Good Neighbor Summit, which you can see on the bottom screen there. That is the first Good Neighbor Summit. We've now had 2 in a row, and this year we'll have our 3rd annual Good Neighbor Summit. So in all of this, I realized if I did not get involved in advocacy, my family business would probably be shut down. So that momentum of advocacy continued to build, and I joined the short-term rental advocacy, the short-term rental advisory committee called STRAC in Denver. And that's where I sat alongside and continue to this day with members of city council, as well as our enforcement department. Last fall, I ended up launching a podcast with Matt Landau called How to Save Your Vacation Rental Business. And the reason I share with you all of these little pieces is that they were milestones in my own journey on how I ended up landing in a position working with the awesome team at Rent Responsibly. So just to give you a background, Rent Responsibly has been around for a couple years, but it's really been in the last few, I'd say, 6 to 8 months that we've really started to define who we are, who our audience is, and how we can really serve our community. So Rent Responsibly is a short-term rental community building and alliance management support platform. So we offer resources built around education, community building, organizing and mobilization, local government engagement, building positive press, resource sharing, and leadership development. I specifically play a role where I'm helping leaders develop and learn how to motivate and engage the larger alliance and community. And I just want to say thank you again for everyone that is here attending this session live or watching this session later, because that step right there in and of itself is a form of advocacy, and you should be really proud of yourself. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about advocacy, because I think it's a word that can sometimes turn people off or they stop listening. If you don't currently have a regulation battle in your own backyard, you might think it seems like a topic that really doesn't pertain to you. But every moving part of short-term rentals has a responsibility to get involved in advocacy. So what we have here in front of us on the screen is the 5 W's of advocacy. We have what, who, when, and where. And so advocacy, as I said in the beginning of this session, it's rooted in creating a community. If we don't have a community, we cannot have advocacy. So by celebrating what makes short-term rentals so special is a no-fail proven method to help others in your community understand the value of short-term rentals. A really big part of this is the who. So your biggest proponents of advocacy or getting involved in building an alliance are going to be hosts and managers, because oftentimes they have the biggest things at stake or maybe the biggest opportunities for losses. But it's very critical to not overlook businesses and other stakeholders who really do rely on the value that short-term rentals bring to their own businesses. So, if there is a boutique or a coffee shop around the corner of from your short-term rental, building a relationship with that business owner and letting them know that you're sending your guests to their business, especially as we come out of this pandemic, especially as we leave a recession, more valuable than ever for them to understand who their customers are and where they're coming from. Advocacy, when does it happen? It happens every day. Advocacy is happening right now, and at any given moment, it can happen. So always looking for ways in which you can actively be an advocate for short-term rentals is really valuable. So when you think about talking to the cafe owner around the corner, telling them that you're sending your guests to their business, that in and of itself is doing advocacy. Where does advocacy happen? So advocacy doesn't just happen at organized events or in front of your local leaders, it happens everywhere. So as I said, it's happening now, but it also happens at City Hall, it happens online, and it happens at networking events. And the most important is the why. So if no one stood up and raised their hand and voiced their concerns or the value that short-term rentals bring to the community, we wouldn't have an opportunity to be having short-term rentals. We would see them banned within communities. And we've seen that happen in communities where there is no alliance organized, where they have to act as a reactive mode to what might be looking like short-term rental bans happening or really bad negative regulations. And so, like I said earlier, if it wasn't for seeing the opportunity of possibly losing our family business, I wouldn't have gotten involved. And I didn't really have a choice about getting involved. So by being a leader and joining together with your community, that's going to ensure that you have a sustainable future for short-term rentals. So now that I've given you a little background on advocacy and all the who, what, where, when, whys, I wanted to go ahead and share with you some resources that my former self wishes I had. So when I joined the Rent Responsibly team, I got so excited that I could start building resources that we could share with other hosts in the community that would help them get started without having to start from scratch. So like I said, I did not have any experience in doing advocacy when I first started. And I kept feeling like, God, I know somebody's done something out there that's similar to this. Like, I just want to be able to use what they have and maybe, make it better or improve it so I could be that much more impactful with already having such a limited time that I could devote to doing advocacy. So my 3 favorite resources that we've built out at Rent Responsibly, I'm going to give you a little brief overview of what those are. So the one that I'm probably the most excited about is something I don't think exists anywhere within the resources in our community. It's our DIY guide. So this guide is a really robust tool that you can use to help build a sustainable short-term rental alliance. If you see there's a little QR code on the bottom of your screen, if you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to our guide. We have a bunch of resources on our website, so it's more than just these 3, but I wanted to highlight these 3. So the guide's going to be really in depth about how to build an alliance, how to keep members engaged, how to talk to city council. And speaking of talking to city council, another tool that we have is a public comment 101 resource. So a lot of times people think I could never go sign up to speak at public comment. They get terrified. I still get nervous when I do it, but it's so exhilarating because at the end of the day, city council, city legislators, they work for us. And so they have the responsibility to hear from us. And if they're not hearing from us, they're sure as heck hearing from the neighbor that maybe is upset because they happen to live next to a party house, or a neighbor that doesn't like seeing guests come and go. And so understanding how to write an effective public comment, your delivery, and some of those really helpful tips is going to be all of the resources you'll find in the public comment download. Then we also have our Good Neighbor Guide. This is a really important resource for all hosts to have. So this is going to give you win-wins. It's going to teach you how to have proactive management tools to handle nuisances if they do come up. And it teaches you about the importance of communicating in advance with your neighbors and letting them know that you have a short-term rental, that you are a professional and responsible host, and that you want them to always know that they can reach out to you first if they ever do have a problem that arises. So again, check out these resources. They're super helpful. And then share them with other hosts that are in your community, whether it's locally or if you're part of any other networking groups. I'm really excited and to see these tools continue to grow. And I think that they will be super helpful for you as well. And then I wanted to share with you about some events that we have. So I think part of the responsibility of being a good host is continuing education. So some of the things that we are building out at Rent Responsibly, it's not just downloadables or one-sheeters or blog entries. It's actual events where you can network with other hosts in the community. So I know we've been doing a lot of virtual events these days, but we've really tried to create intimate experiences where we do breakout rooms and you have a chance to share best practices and learn from other hosts. It's oftentimes other hosts in a breakout room that are going to teach you something that they have done that has been foolproof as a way to ensure that you get great guests in your properties. And so one of the events that we have coming up is actually tomorrow. It's called a Lunch and Learn event, and it's optimizing automations for 5-star guests. So that's tomorrow at 2:30 Eastern time, 11:30 Pacific time. And we'll be hearing all about how we can ensure that we have good guests, because when we have good guests, we're not going to be a disruption to our local community. And so we have Breezeway and Noise Aware that are both founding partners of Rent Responsibly that will be there helping us put on this event tomorrow. I wanted to highlight another event that we have coming up on July 13th. It's Building Bridges. This one is specifically for leaders. So leaders that are starting an alliance or already have an alliance formed or are curious to learn more about what it means to be in that leadership role. So we're going to talk about how we can leverage relationships in our local communities. So think about leveraging relationships with city council, how to get involved with local associations and organizations, as well as even leveraging relationships with people that we might consider the opposition. So it can be kind of, I'd say maybe nerve-wracking to consider having a conversation with somebody that's opposed to short-term rentals. But the more that we can really listen and learn, I think the more we'll have compromise, and that is going to be our sustainable path forwards. And then the third event I want to share with you all is our data roadmap event. So that will be on July 22nd. We'll talk about 2021 travel trends and post-COVID recovery predictions. I don't know about you guys, but that title alone just gets me super excited because I think there's so much that's happening so fast in front of us. COVID turned the world upside down, and we're definitely coming out of this with this rocket rebound. And so we're going to talk with Verbo as well as key data at that event. So opportunities, like I said, to learn and as well as connect with through breakout rooms with other hosts in the community. So just wanted to go ahead and share those. You can scan the QR code there as well to sign up and register for those events. And that wraps it up. So I know we had some Q&A or an opportunity to share some of our best practices at the end of this session, but I wanted to open up the floor, and if there are Q&A questions, I can answer those, or I can just share some of our other best first steps to take to get organized.
That's awesome, Dani. What an amazing high-level overview of everything you guys do, and it's just so great to have a phenomenal resource like that in our industry. Really excited that you guys, everything that you're doing. So I've got some discussion points. If we don't have any questions, so maybe we'll just give it a moment to see what pops up. But I know you touched on the Good Neighbor guidebook, and what about first steps? Could you speak to things are changing, laws are changing in my city. I don't know what to do. I don't want to lose my business. What can I start with? Maybe speak to that for just a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step you can do is to know what your regulations are. There's nothing worse than setting up your short-term rental, getting your photos taken, having everything picked out to find out that short-term rentals are not allowed. So knowing your regulations, it may seem obvious, but I can't tell you how many times people get caught off guard, not knowing that regulations are in the process of being discussed at your town hall, and then midway through their formalized. So know your regulations is your first step. I would then say the next most important step you can do is get involved. So if you go to the rentresponsibly.org website, we have a local alliances section. So if you don't already know that you have a local alliance in your community, that is a great resource to check and see if one already exists. If one exists, reach out to them, ask about how you can get involved. As somebody that's a leader of my own local alliance, when somebody reaches out and says, how can I get involved? That is music to my ears, because we're always trying to make the hour stretch and our efforts go that much further. And so oftentimes I call advocacy the thing that happens in the 25th hour. It's beyond the window that we really allot our schedule to dedicate time to, but it's the most important thing if we really think about how do we want to continue to short-term rent our properties. So join an alliance, ask what you can do to help. If one doesn't exist and you do a Google search and you look at the Rent Responsibly website, start one. This is a really great opportunity to build a community-based group where you get to control the narrative and you get to have an impact on the outcome. So I was not at the table when short-term rental regulations were formed in Denver. I was not doing short-term rentals, and I really wish I was there, because primary residence, other than a ban, primary residence makes short-term renting your property really challenging. And so if you don't want to have outcomes that end up impeding the way that you operate your business, the best thing you can do is to pull up a seat at the table and make sure that you're organized with other hosts. So reaching out to other hosts and saying, hey, let's start a group. Like, do you have a space we can use? And then go to that DIY guide. That guidebook is going to give you all of the steps on how to get started from the very beginning all the way through an ordinance.
That's awesome. Really, really helpful ways to get started. And I know through your alliances, through your website, you guys have a lot of perfect resources to start a local alliance if it's not there. Astrho also has some advocacy sessions within our community where you can get involved with people locally that have already joined. So a lot of good ways to connect with people that way. So I don't see that we have any other questions, but I actually have one. It's a personal experience with short-term rentals, where my previous home, they weren't allowed. You could have one permit per 250-foot radius. Yet there were probably 5 of my neighbors that were operating illegally without a permit. And it was causing a nuisance to the neighbors that didn't do that. And I just wondered if you could speak to that, or if you had any other ideas of how to deal with your neighbors if it's already a sore subject or it's already a contention point, and what to do there.
Yeah, I'd say unfortunately, it's the bad apples that ruin the whole bunch. I mean, it's a phrase that we often say that, the illegal operators, or the people that are not following the rules, oftentimes ruin it for everyone else. And so when they make regulations, they're making regulations that are doing more harm to those that are in compliance, because the people that are not in compliance, they're not going to follow regulations anyway. So it's really about reaching out to all hosts and elevating hosting practices within the community. So the Good Neighbor Summit was an opportunity for us to make sure we were putting out good press, but also making sure that everyone had the tools and the resources to understand things like, upgrading your trash can size so that it could take a higher volume of trash. Like, short-term rental guests go through more trash and recycling than traditional full-time residences. And so a lot of people don't know that you can call the city and request a larger trash can, or how to flag, potentially bad guest reservations. So changing things like to have a 2-night minimum, and to make sure that you are checking all the boxes to ensure that they have a government verified ID, and that there are certain ways that you can really educate the community. But at the end of the day, it could be something as straightforward and direct as, if you can, reaching out to the host, the person that is illegally listing their property, and having a conversation and really opening up a dialogue with them. Because yeah, it's going to be a unfortunate representation of the whole hosting community when you have hosts that are not following the rules and becoming a nuisance to the neighborhood.
Sure. Good advice. I love those specific suggestions too. I know we're right at time, but I have one quick question that popped up about HOAs. Does Rent Responsibly assist with how to deal with an HOA that's putting a lot of restrictions, or any guidance there?
So HOAs are really tricky because they all have their own bylaws. And so we can give guidance on how to have some of those conversations, but there are some lines that we're unfortunately not able to cross. So when it comes to legal advice, we're not licensed to give legal advice. And when it comes to HOAs, because it's such a unique scenario, we can point people in the right direction. We can connect them with certain resources, but that's not an area that we dive into as far as how we're able to educate and provide solutions for HOAs. But yes, HOAs have definitely kind of been, I'd say, a regulation that layers on top of your local regulations, and they really have the power to shut short-term rentals out of a community. So they are without a doubt something we see a lot.
For sure. Yep. Well, thank you, Dana. It's such a pleasure having you join us today. Amazing presentation. Thanks for all that you're doing at Rent Responsibly, and have a great week. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.